Well, hey, good evening, everyone. How you doing? Hopefully, you've had a good day today. I know for me, it's been good. I finished off all my filming for Sunday, and yeah, it's a weird feeling to be done your sermon on Thursday. Yeah, so it's a now that I don't finish my sermon prep, when I usually deliver my sermon on Sundays, but it's just weird to be completely done. And now it's just in the hands of Josh, and Josh is going to put it all together. But yeah, so that was my day today. This morning, we are touching on a new chapter with Max Lucado's book here, Anxious for Nothing, Finding Calm in a Chaotic World. And I'm going to actually pull it right back so you can get caught up. So this is talking about, the storms of life and where, kind of where we are and how we manage those storms. So I'm gonna just start there. So he says this. He goes, "Did you?" He says, "Are you in a storm of anxiety because you didn't listen to God? He told you that sex outside of marriage would result in chaos, but you didn't listen. He told you that the borrower is a slave to the lender, but you took on the dangerous debt. He told you to cherish your spouse and your children, but you cherished your career and you nourished your vices. He cautioned you about the wrong crowd and the strong drink and the long hours, but you didn't listen. And now you are in a storm of your own making. If this describes you, receive God's rebuke. He corrects those who he loves, and he loves you. So stand corrected, confess your sin, and resolve to do better. Be wiser next time. Learn from your poor choice. But don't despair. While the story contains one rebuke, it also contains three promises that can give us peace in the middle of the storm. And here's promise number one: heaven has helpers to help you. Paul said, "There stood by me this night an angel," verse 23, "on the deck of a sinking ship. In a raging storm, Paul received a visitor from heaven. An angel came and stood beside him, and angels will come and help us." Recently, after a church service, one of our members approached me in the reception line. Her eyes were full of tears and wonder as she said, "I saw your angel." "You did?" "Yes, he stood near you as you preached." I find comfort in that thought. I also find many scriptures to support it. All the angels are spirits who serve God and are sent to help those who receive salvation. Hebrews 1:14. The prophet Daniel experienced the assistance of angels. He was troubled. He resolved to pray. After 3 weeks, so much for one-shot attempts at prayer, Daniel saw a man dressed in linen with a belt of gold around his waist. His body was like topaz, and his face like lightning, his eyes on fire. His arms and legs resembled burnished bronze, and his voice was like the roar of a multitude. Daniel 10:5 and 6. Daniel was so stunned, he fell to the ground. And the angel said this. He said, "Don't be afraid, Daniel, since the first day you began to pray for understanding and to humble yourself before your God, your request has been heard in heaven. I have come in answer to your prayer, but for 21 days the prince of the kingdom of Persia, blocked my way. Then Michael, one of the archangels, came to me to help me, and I left him there with the spirit prince of the kingdom of Persia. Now I am here to explain what will happen to your people in the future. Verses 12, 13, and 14. The moment Daniel began praying, the answer was issued. Demonic forces blocked the pathway of the angel. The impasse lasted a full 3 weeks until the archangel Michael arrived on the scene with his superior authority. The standoff was ended and the prayer was answered. Have your prayers been met with a silent sky? Have you prayed and heard nothing? Are you floundering in the land between an offered and an unanswered prayer? Do you feel the press of Satan's mortar and pestle? If so, I beg you, don't give up. What the angel said to Daniel, God says to you. Since the first day that you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourselves before your God, your words were heard. You have been heard in heaven. Angelic armies have been dispatched. Reinforcements have been rallied. God promises, I will contend with him who contends with you. Isaiah 49:25. So do what Daniel did. Remain before the Lord. Those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up like wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not be faint. That's Isaiah 40:31. The angel protected Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace later on in Daniel 3:23-26. They can protect you. An angel escorted Peter out of prison. Acts 12:5-9. They can walk you out of your bondage. He, God, has put his angels in charge of you to watch over you at wherever you go. Psalm 91:11. Heaven has helpers for you. Secondly, heaven has a place for you. Paul knew this, for there stood by me this night an angel of God to whom I belong. Acts 27:23. When parents send their kids to summer camp, they have to sign certain documents. One of the documents asks who is the responsible party. If Johnny breaks his arm or Susie breaks out with measles, who will be responsible? Hopefully, mom and dad are willing to sign their names. God signed his. When you gave your life to him, he took responsibility for you. He guarantees your safe arrival into his port. You are his sheep, and he is your shepherd. Jesus said, I am the good shepherd, and I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. John 10:14. You are a bride. He is your bridegroom. The church is being prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. Revelation 21:2. You are his child. He is your father. So you are no longer a slave, but God's own child. And since you are his child, God has made you his heir. Galatians 4:7. So you can have peace in the midst of the storm because you are not alone. You belong to God. And lastly, You are in the Lord's service. For there stood by me this night an angel of God to whom I belong and whom I serve. Acts 27:23. God had given Paul an assignment: carry the gospel to Rome. Paul had not yet arrived to Rome, so God was not yet finished with him. Since God was not yet finished, Paul knew he would survive. Most of us don't have a clear message like Paul's, but we do have an assurance that we will not live one day less than we are supposed to live. So if God has work for you to do, he will keep you alive to do it. You know, it says, all the days planned for me were written in your book before I was 1 day old. Psalm 139:16. No life is too short or too long. You will live your prescribed number of days. You might change the quality of your days, but not the quantity. I'm not saying that you will have no more problems in your future. Quite the contrary. Paul had his share, and so will you. Look at verse 22. It says, and now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. It's not easy to lose your ship. Your ship is the vessel that carries, it sustains and protects and supports you. Your boat is your marriage, your body, your business. Because of your boat, you stayed afloat. And now without your boat, you think you will sink. You're correct. You will, for a while. Waves will sweep over you. Fear will suck you under like the Pacific riptide. But take heart, says Paul. In this world, you will have trouble, but be brave. I have defeated the world. John 16:33. You can lose it all, only to discover that you haven't. God has been there all along. God has never promised a life with no storms, but he has promised to be there when we face them. Consider the compelling testimony of Jehoshaphat. He ascended the throne at the age of 35, reigned for 25 years. According to the book of 2 Chronicles, the Moabites formed a great and powerful confederacy with the surrounding nations and marched against Jehoshaphat. It was a military version of a perfect storm. The Jews could handle one army, but when one army allies with another, and those two combined with a third, it was more than the king can handle. Jehoshaphat's response deserves a spot in the anxiety treatment textbook. This is what he says. He set himself to seek the Lord. He proclaimed a fast throughout all Judah. He cried out to God in prayer, and he confessed. He says, we have no power, nor do we know what to do, but our eyes are upon you. God responded with this message: do not be afraid, nor dismayed, because of this great multitude, for the battle is not yours, but God's. Jehoshaphat so totally believed in God that he made the remarkable decision of marching into battle with singers in the front. I'm confident that people who signed up for the choir never imagined that they would be leading the army. But Jehoshaphat knew the real battle was a spiritual one, so he led with worship and worshipers. By the time they reached the battlefield, the battle was over. The enemies had turned on each other, and the Hebrews never had to raise a sword. Learn a lesson from the king. Lead with worship. Go first to your Father in prayer and praise. Confess to him your fears. Gather with his people. Set your face toward God. Fast. Cry out for help. Admit your weakness. Then once God moves, you move too. Expect to see the God of ages fight for you. He is near as your next breath. Noah Drew can tell you he was one of 2 years old when he discovered the protective presence of Jesus. The Drew family was making the short drive from their house to their neighborhood pool. Lee Anna, the mom, was driving so slowly that the automatic door locks did not engage. Noah opened his door and fell out. She felt a bump as if there had been driven over a speed bump and braked to a quick to stop. Her husband Ben jumped out of the car and found Noah on the pavement. "He's alive!" Ben shouted and placed him on the seat. Noah's legs were covered in blood and was shaking violently. Leanna hurried over to the passenger seat and held Noah on her lap, and Ben drove to the ER. Incredibly, the test showed no broken bones. A 5,000-pound vehicle had run over his legs, yet little Noah had nothing but cuts and bruises to show for it. Later that night, Leanna dropped to her knees and thanked Jesus for sparing her son. She then stretched out on the bed next to him. He was asleep. At least she thought he was. As she was lying beside him in the dark, he said, "Mama, Jesus caught me." She said, "He did?" Noah replied, "I told Jesus thank you, and he said, 'You're very welcome.'" The next day he gave some details. "Mama, Jesus has brown hands. He caught me like this." He held his arms outstretched, cupping his little hands. The next day he told more that Jesus had brown hair. And when she asked for more information, he said, "That's all," in a very nonchalant manner. But when he said his prayers that night, he said, "Thank you, Jesus, for catching me." Northeasters bear down on the best of us. Contrary winds, crashing waves, they come. But Jesus still catches his children. He still extends his arms. He still sends an angel because you belong to him. And you can have peace in the midst of the storm. The same Jesus who sent the angel to Paul sends this message to you. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. Isaiah 43:2. You may be facing the perfect storm, but Jesus offers the perfect peace. There's so many things that come out of these 3 things, and about being present with Jesus and having a place with him, being called by him. And I just love Jehoshaphat's story. Actually, I was going to actually preach on that a few weeks ago, about how nothing makes sense. Everything was, and it's so connected to our COVID lockdown. Like there's so many things spinning out of control. So many different variables happening, and Jehoshaphat is, these enemies, these armies are surrounding him, and he leads out with these singers, these worshipers, and I just love that part. He says next time when you're crying out, he's like, lead with worship and leave with adoration and thanksgiving. Have that attitude of gratitude. Turn your if onlys to the alreadys, and to know that God is always with you. And then to hear about this story about Noah being caught by Jesus. Man, it just grabs you, doesn't it? Because there's so many times where we feel we're alone in this journey with Jesus, this journey, what we call life. And I love that you can't add a single day, you can't do quantity, but we can at least have this quality of life. And I think that's where it starts, doesn't it? Is the quality of life that we have. And it's not our life, it's the Lord's life that he's given us. He's given us everything around us. Cars, luggage, the ability to travel. He's given us spouses and friends. He's given us children on lend. all these things are just such a blessing from God. But I don't demand them. I don't have an inalienable right to them. They're all these gifts from the Lord. But at the end of it, these storms of life, I'm reminded also of Job. Job had all those things stripped away from him. And he still never cursed God. He trusted. And again, like yesterday's devotion, he anchored his relationship in God's character. Anxiety is going to happen no matter what. But here we have a bit of a blueprint, a bit of an understanding, maybe a bit of a strategy, a better theology of how to deal with suffering and how to deal with anxiety. I remember when we were doing research on panic attacks, and they're real. I've had a panic attack. My daughter's had one. I know some of our youth back in the day would have frequent panic attacks when anxiety would grip you and you would start to breathe uncontrollably, and you'd have hyperventilate. And I remember doing some research, and I went to one of our staff people that was wrestling with a lot of anxiety. And one of the first things the psychology journal said is, there is no such thing as a perpetual 365-day, 24/7 panic attack. And I was like, okay. But then the next line is, panic attacks will always end. There's always an end. There's always the storm that rages, but there always will be the calm that comes after. And hearing this chapter is to know that if you're in that panic, that storm where you've lost the ship, to know that God is always with you. He's always been present. And I leave that with you tonight. That God's doing this not because he's compelled to do it. He still chooses you because he loves you. He has a plan for your life. And not to harm you, to give you a future and a hope. And it might feel like you're stranded out in the middle of the Atlantic, hugging a piece of driftwood. But to know that God's got you. And he'll carry you. He'll lift you up. Well, God bless you guys. May God's face shine upon you, give you peace and rest as you sleep. I'll see you tomorrow morning for the next chapter. And the next chapter is meditate on good things. Think about things that are worthy of praise. All right, God bless you guys, and we will talk to you in the morning. Bye for now.